This is still technically part of episode 14 of the kitchen sewing table, and this is the Brother LX3014, and this is the piece, the wall quilt that I'm calling wired. And I like to use the Brother because it's typical of the machines that are available today and what you might run into with this kind of a project. Now remember, this is probably a poly cotton fabric front and back, and flannel batting in the center, and I have set up the machine. I've got it on stitch number 5, which is a nice satin stitch if you don't make any adjustments. I have the tension currently on 2, simply because I'm going through 3 layers. And what I did to the right of the stitch selector knob is a little place with a plus and a minus, and you can open up the satin stitch a little bit, which I have done by turning that to the right just a little bit. Now, it was making, before I made that adjustment, it was making a wonderful satin stitch on muslin. But I don't want to use that much thread, so I opened it up a little bit. This is the one that has the design new pastels for the chalk, and they are now made by Prismacolor. I am using random polyester cotton threads, and I may end up using different colors along the way. I'm not going to make a full video like I did with the broken glass wall quilt, but I just wanted to show you how the Brother or a modern machine would do the same thing I had done on the vintage 237. Now, I may have to adjust the tension a little bit, and there was something else that we might need to consider. I did wind bobbins with green, bright green, so on this one the back will automatically be a green that's a little bit brighter than the fabric. Now again, I'm not pulling it through, I'm not fighting with the feed dogs. I am simply making sure it feeds correctly, and I just want to check my tension before I go too far. And you can see I've got, it's too loose. It's too loose at 2. Now that's not going to hurt anything, but I need to tighten it a little bit. Now the test fabric I did it on just wasn't layered. The other thing is, I keep forgetting the thought, going through 3 layers like this, it's going to be different in how you shift it and how you keep it flat. So let me check the tension now that I got a little further down. And better, but still too loose. Now, for me personally, I'm not really upset about the back, and I'm not going to rip it out. But this is why I should have found a similar fabric, set up a test, and done the thread and the stitch adjustments before, and the tension adjustment before I started. Now you may notice that this seems to be feeding through the feed jogs a little bit better than it did with the 237, but I think it's not actually the difference in the machines, it's the difference in the fabric layers. So on the top, this is going to be beautiful. On the back, that one section is just not a tight enough, the upper thread is not tight enough. So now let me double check I have it threaded correctly, and I do. Before I started this, the thread tension was at 4, so I figured I better go down to at least 2 because of the layering, but it looks like I didn't need to go down that far. Now the other thing that's different on this one is I'm starting in the center. Yesterday when I was working on the broken glass piece, I started with whatever color I wanted to do first. But this, because it's a layered quilt, I'm starting at the center and working out, which is going to change the layering of the stitches one over another, one color over another. So right now, this turquoise blue looks like it's over the orange, but it's going to end up being under the orange. And whenever you have a layered quilt, even if you have it very well pinned, it's best to start at the center and work out. Okay, so something isn't happy, and I don't know what that is. This is, these threads are inexpensive threads. And the thread spool, these are little things that happen when you're sewing. Somehow the thread got off the spool and was starting to act weird, which changes the tension. Now it sounds like it's really running rough, but it actually isn't. This is a very tightly woven, like a broadcloth fabric, and it's a tight stitch. I'm getting almost no puckering at all, because this is a completely different fabric than the wool that I was using. So you can see that there are differences with the fabric and the thread and the tension when you do it. And remember, with any of the chalks I've tried so far, you have about 2 hours of handling time, of shifting fabric, and so the chalk, it gets messy, it moves everywhere as you move the fabric around. But I found that I just about ran out of chalk marks at 2 to 2.5 hours. With handling a wall quilt size piece, which is about 36 by 36. So this is why I thought of hand quilting this one, but because I know I've got 2 hours of handling time, it really is easier to do it with a machine. Also because I still wanted to use a zigzag stitch. So this is how the idea of a chalk wall quilt will work on a more modern machine, layered, and how you can take just simple chalk and 2 yards of fabric total with a batting in between and make a wonderful wall quilt. Now I'm going to continue here because I was going to end it there. I want to do a couple of things. Here is what I should have done in the first place, and similar 3 layers to the quilt. These are Design New Pastels on there, and I just watched that part of the video and I was like, what is all of that around the needle? It looks like smoke, and that is how much chalk dust gets thrown up as you do this, which means you now have more attention to, because the light throws off heat, we have a little air tornado going on here where the chalk gets kicked up by the needle and the presser foot. It's going to go into the warm air right around the needle and go up into your machine. And right now, this piece of fabric is going to double as the fabric I clean off the presser foot with. But it's not only keeping the dust out of the feed dogs. I'm going to have to make sure that if I do this all the time, I am, and on this machine you have to take the screws out of the back to take the faceplate off and then oil the machine. I'm going to have to clean it out in there more often if I do this all the time with the brother. So now I just looked at the back of that and the tension, and it seemed to get actually worse instead of better. So I'm going to start at the beginning. I've got the tension on 1, and I haven't changed any other settings. And I'm going to see what kind of a stitch I get. Remember, the brother likes a long tail when you trim the threads so it doesn't come unthreaded. Okay, so that's obviously too loose because I've got all the upper thread showing and no bottom thread, which is plain green. So I'm going to go up to a 3 because that was obviously too loose. I think I either didn't change the tension with the needle up or something, but it didn't really change as much as it should have when I was sewing on the other piece. And the thread broke, but I think this thread this is why you should usually buy good thread. Okay, so now that's an improvement, but it's still, now it's half and half. So 3 is not tight enough. I'm going to go back up almost to 5. And what I'm going to have to do, I think, is open up the stitch a little bit wider, which is just turning the screw, the adjustment screw at the plus and minus, a little bit more toward the plus. So I've got the tension at like 4.5. And the thread is actually stuck in the tension. So these little, they're almost the same. Now, the reason this is so tight is because I have it at 4.5. So this is the point where you're dealing with, do I have the tension too tight and it's going to break the thread? And do I change something else to get the tension correct? And what I could do is loosen the bobbin tension. But, you know, all of that should be able to be done from the upper tension. And even though that feels tight to thread the needle at 4.5, the tension goes up to number 9. So, just to make sure, you might have to have the presser foot up to change the tension. I didn't think they continued that on the modern machines, but you never know. So this is 4.5. And it broke the thread again. So now, we're going to put a better thread in here. Which will be I'll try this one. This is a 100% polyester thread. I'm trying to stay with the same color, or a range of colors. Now, this is why, even though I buy vintage threads, and I can use the Model 66, the white family rotary, they all, those two, the 237, to some extent the 1591, the 99, and the Spartan, are all much better about taking any kind of thread. Some machines want a stronger modern thread. So let's see how this works. I'm going to put it back up to 4.5. And this is 100% polyester thread. And there we go. I could even, you can see on this, we're still seeing the top thread. This is all, that gray is just in the way. I don't know where that came from. We're still seeing the top thread, but nowhere near like over here or over here. This was 1, this is 3, this is 4.5. And this is what I should have done. Now what I'm going to do is go up to 5. This is what I should have done before I started. And I guess I've just shown you why you should do that. So now we know why we buy good quality thread. While we take the time to go through these practice stitches. It's just like knitting in a lot of ways, or crocheting. You always do a test swatch before you actually start to knit, because with knitting and crocheting you can be trying to make a size 7 and end up with a size 5 if you don't have things right. It's kind of the same thing. So this one right here is at 5, and I'm still seeing just a touch of needle thread, of upper needle thread. So but this is, if you could feel this, this is going to be a wonderful quilt. The flannel and the 2 pieces of fabric, this is wonderful feeling, well quilted. Well, it feels well quilted. So I'm going to go ahead and clean off the dust a little bit more. From here, I'm going to have to keep an eye on the dust up here and into the upper part of the machine, and I will go ahead and quilt. Here is a better view of the back of the piece. Here's the front. See how the front looks fine. But the back, the middle one is when this was set at tension of 1. This is a tension of 3, which was about half and half. This is bottom row here is a tension of 4.5, but I was still getting too much of the top thread. This is 5, and the final setting for broadcloth, flannel, and broadcloth zigzag stitch on stitch number 5, opened up just a little bit, is 5.5, which is where my thumb is right now, which is a lot of tension for this machine and for this project, but this is what I should have done at the beginning, is go through all of these trials and get to the 5.5. Now, why am I doing this? Because some people who are just starting to sew may not realize, they may think, oh, she's just being picky about the stitches. That's not it. What you need for a lock stitch is a balanced lock stitch, and technically the top and the bottom threads are supposed to interlink or loop together in the middle of the fabric. So even though this is at 5.5 and an acceptable stitch, there is still a little bit of a variance, and it's not yet a perfectly balanced stitch. I mean, here's the tension knob, and I'm at 5.5. Now, could I take it to 6? Maybe. Do I need to? I don't know. So I will fiddle with it a little bit more as to, and the reason I say I don't know, 5.5 will work. If I want to be completely technical and have a perfectly balanced stitch, I would probably fiddle with it a little bit more and maybe end up at 6. Now, when you're thinking like that, you have to bring in what machine you're using. So on, say, the Singer 1591, I would do that because that particular machine is very well engineered, and finding that perfectly balanced stitch might be a little bit easier. With inexpensive machines made in China, even if they're wonderful machines like this one is, they don't have that level of engineering. So I could fiddle with it further and still not get an improvement. It depends on how finely engineered the actual tension is. So keep in mind what machine you're using, the fabric, the batting, the thread. All of these go into each piece. And I think this is somewhat why some people get frustrated with sewing or learning to sew. But it all comes with experience. It's not like you have to have a book other than the manual. If you follow the directions in any sewing machine manual, they will be making recommendations that go along with the machine that you own. But as you sew more and more, so in other words, I'm not going to fiddle anymore with it because I'm dealing with a $100 brother, and I'm not going to get Cadillac stitching out of a Chevy. And so this will be good enough, especially since it's a wall quilt that isn't going to get daily handling and everything like that. So sewing perfectionists would have a problem with me saying that, but life's too short to be complaining that brother didn't engineer their machines well enough. I'm not going to spend the extra time. This is a good enough stitch. It's 5.5. and that's what we're doing the quilt at. And I think the camera kind of fell off the stand in the end of the last clip, so I apologize for that, and I hope that you find enjoyment in making wall quilts like this and not frustration.